Whakatapu ki he awhio ai o tua, koe ta mai alo, pea moe lau maalie ma oni oni. Whakatapu ki he katkai o I whunua moe kau a ahi kotoa pē. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners, the Yagara and the Yugambeh language speaking peoples, their elders past, present and emerging. And from a Pacifica context, I'd also like to acknowledge God and our educators and learners in this space. I wanted to share a little bit about how I have disseminated my research since graduating. One of the key, I'll give you two key points that I have used to be able to disseminate the knowledge. First and foremost, it's been around the whole ethos of diversity, equity and inclusion by specifically using Indigenous methodologies and privileging Indigenous, in my case, Pacifica ways of knowing and being and doing. So you'll see some different video clips and photos of the haka. The haka is a movement piece that we do, and quite often a lot of our knowledges are put in song and dance. So what I would do is I would weave the knowledge that I wanted to share with the audience, because quite prominently most of the time they were mainstream Western audiences that perhaps would have no idea about what the haka is. So it was a lot of learning and experiencing something different, but weaving the knowledge in that way. So I would do a haka, a movement piece. I would use weaving with the bandana sleeves, and then I'd also use cultural artifacts, just as a way that the participants can touch and feel the different artifacts that we had, from cultural bags to bowls to kava bowls, and then from that we would build connection around that. If I was to apply it in the classroom, I think the important, it's one thing to say equity, diversity and inclusion, but if we're not being open to really implement that in our classrooms, it's just tokenistic. So if I was to apply this, if I wasn't from Pacific heritage and I wanted to apply that concept of the Pacific ways of being and doing, I would start by acknowledging the cultural heritage of the students that are in the classroom. And I would bet my bottom dollar that in that classroom that you'd probably have many students from different cultural backgrounds. So even just asking them what is your cultural heritage, and perhaps what are some of the frameworks in which they share their knowledge. I have a colleague here, Rob, who's recording me, and he said he's Irish. And when I asked him, he said they use music. So finding their different, the different vehicles in which they share knowledge to perhaps bring that into the classroom and open up that diversity of learning and engagement. And the last thing that I have, that I've done in terms of disseminating my knowledge, is the use of intergenerational knowledge holders and practitioners. So because my thesis was based on 3 generations, my elders, parents and young people, I deliberately, in all my presentations, which ended up being quite an expensive task on my point, I would deliberately take an elder or elders to represent and speak in that platform, as well as a young person and myself. So every step of the way I committed to not just studying and embracing these intergenerational knowledges, but I also made sure that they were part of the dissemination of the work. Now, if I was to apply it in my classroom, not being from a Pacific heritage, I would probably just bring, if we're to talk about topics, for example, equity, diversity and inclusion, I would perhaps just be conscious to ask questions around what would our elders, or what would your grandparents think about this topic, and what would their perspective be? What would the teenagers in your family think about equity, diversity, inclusion, and what would their perspective? So I guess it's that consciousness of the intergenerational perspectives and knowledges around whatever it is that they're learning. So these are the ways that I've worked quite passionately and prominently to truly be equitable, diverse and inclusive in our learning and sharing of knowledge. Malo apito, tua o whaato.